Today on Mother Mayhem.
And when I have withdrawn, then I am accused of cutting her out. I have gone low contact with Mum, and in the past, we just seem to dip back into these same patterns of her exploding and then me feeling responsible and feeling guilty and then chasing her. But recently, like literally this week, after a particularly bad episode with her, I had just had enough. I had gone no contact with my mum, and I feel good about it.
Welcome back to Mother Mayhem, the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast for daughters. I'm your host, Heather Gray, and today's episode, I need to start it with an apology because I really messed this entirely up. Ages ago, I think we're going back as far as December 2023, I received a question asking me to address what happens to daughters of narcissistic mothers when you all become mothers yourselves. As you can imagine, that is a whole heck of a lot. It's a really big conversation. It's filled with fear, vulnerability, and confusion. Talking about how your childhoods have impacted your experience of mothering is a really big deal. I take it so seriously, and yet I still messed it up with poor decision making and even worse, communication. So now, please allow me a second to clean the slate and my conscience with this apology. Hopefully, by taking this moment with you now, I'm also modeling for you how you can do this with your own kids when you mess up and move left or right of your center of who and how you want to be. So I got the first request for this topic at the end of last year. At the time, I had already been planning our first coaching sessions that we were going to have over Zoom. I had been working really hard to crank out episodes for the podcast, and I was trying to meet all of my responsibilities of being a therapist in private practice. I had started to draft out what an episode about mothering after childhood narcissistic abuse and what that might look like, and I realized it was a lot. Like a lot. Then another question came in. So I had decided that once I got the coaching groups under my belt, I would offer a separate workshop on this topic alone, and I would cover it that way. Then I just got into the weeds with all of it, and the workshop idea fell by the wayside. I never communicated with the letter writers about the status of their questions, and it all fell into this pile of ideas that I never ever followed up on. I feel really badly about that. I should have communicated to the women involved what had happened, and after they were led to believe I would be covering this topic somehow. I know my audience is daughters of narcissistic mothers. You are all far too used to being forgotten, ignored, or made to feel like you're too much. My skipping over this topic had nothing to do with you, but without my communication, you had no way of knowing that. I imagine that made you feel disappointed, unimportant, and worse. You might feel like your vulnerability was just left hanging out there. I hate that I did that. I could have managed all of it better, and I really wish I had. You have my apology. Now, here's my plan for making it right. I am going to make this topic our first two-part episode. Today, you get to meet Tara, and I bet there is more than one listener who's going to nerd out with me when I tell you that Tara is from Australia. And we are fortunate enough that she narrated her story and her question personally. So we all just get to sit back and listen to the most perfect podcast voice for a moment before, sadly, you'll have to return to mine. Tara, I want to tell you why I named you Tara. I originally wanted to pick a name that was specific to Australia. So I looked up different flowers that were native to Australia, and gosh darn it, they were all quite a mouthful and tough to pronounce. But you sure do have some pretty flowers over there, my friend. I learned about the Waratah flower and how it's become a symbol of strength and resilience in Australian culture. But honestly, Waratah is a tough one to say repeatedly. So I changed it to Tara as a nod to that without having me butcher the pronunciation repeatedly. So, everyone, meet Tara, hear her story, and then I will find you all on the other side.
Hi, Heather. I wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for your podcast. When I first found your podcast, it was like a gentle healing balm on the abrasions I have from being the daughter of a narcissistic mother. Gosh, even saying that feels like a betrayal somehow. I always knew my mother was different from other mothers. As a little girl, I knew she had some kind of mood disorder or postnatal depression, or, as my dad would say it, a chemical imbalance. In some ways, Mum was good, and in other ways, she was fucking horrible. Mum has complex trauma, and she suffered multiple assaults and was emotionally and physically abused by her own parents, particularly her mother. My family and I lived on a very remote property, like the literal Australian desert. Town or a neighbour is about 2 hours away. As a child, I remember her being extremely unpredictable. I was never quite sure who I was going to get on any given day. And when Mum was good, she was playful and spontaneous. She encouraged my natural talents for things like music, but she could also be very scary. We were scared of her. I have memories of her screaming at me and getting the silent treatment for things I didn't understand. I have memories of her being wild with rage that she kicked me. I took the brunt and the blame for things like her mental health. On one particularly bad day, she took the shotgun and told me and my siblings that she was going to end her life. I felt completely responsible for why she wanted to die. And she left us at home, and we just waited and waited. And she eventually came back. But there was never any explanation from her or my father. She left my dad multiple times, often dragging us kids out of bed in the middle of the night, piling us into the car and just driving into the bush. Sometimes we'd wake up in the back of the car and we'd be back home, parked at the front gate. And then sometimes we had driven the whole way through the night to the closest city, which was about 1,000 k's away. And my dad would call and convince her to come home, and they'd do this dance, and everything was okay for a little while. But it always continued this way. This leaving, the threats to leave me, my dad, my siblings, it was just a regular thing. And even though it happened often, I found it then to be, and I still find it, very destabilising. The chaos of Mum was triggered by other people or events like Christmas or getting a party invite in the district. We rarely went anywhere in the district because my mum just couldn't handle it. She was suspicious of everyone. She believed everyone was judging her and out to get her. And as a result, I was just isolated from relatives and my friends and locals in the community. Our world was so small. And for a short while, we had a governor stay with us, I think to help Mum out and maybe help with our schooling because we were homeschooled, and Mum just wasn't coping with her mental health. And I remember sitting in this woman's lap reading a book, and I still recall the conflicting sensations in my body. I would have been no more than 6. And I remember feeling the safety of this person and just nuzzling in and feeling just this connection and safety. And then conflicted with the absolute terror that my mum would find us and not be happy. And my threat response was just so on the money that day because Mum found us. And her response was bone-chilling. She looked at the both of us with this face mixed with anger and rejection, and she just walked away. And then the woman left the next day and there was no explanation as to why. But I knew why. It was because of me. Or so I thought. As I grew, I began keeping a diary that she would read. She just couldn't help herself. She would often ignore my privacy, claiming that she was trying to protect me. She didn't want me to make the same mistakes as her. And she also suspected that I was talking badly about her in my writings, which I was. I was turning into a teenager. I needed somewhere to go and to talk to someone about these things that were happening to me. And she would just somehow convince me that reading these things was okay. When I was 17, I was halfway through writing a letter to my then boyfriend, and it expressed my intimate feelings for him, and as well as my confusion and pain about what I felt with Mum. I left the letter in a notepad and hid the notepad in my room. And she found it. Like, she went into my room and she found it and read it and screamed abuse at me. That how dare I, after all these things she'd done for me, that I would treat her this way. I have been called ungrateful innumerable times about the things she has sacrificed for me. Music lessons, clothes, fees for boarding school, you name it, I owe her for it. Because I had done something she didn't agree, or I had hidden from her, and I was always the bad person. The year I turned 19, I had sex for the first time, and on the day before I lost my virginity, she asked me where I was going for the weekend, and I knew she would react badly to this news that I would be going away with my boyfriend, so I lied, and I told her I was spending the weekend with a girlfriend, and she must not have believed me, because later that weekend, she called my friend's house and asked my friend's mum if I was there. And when she found out that I wasn't with my friend, she called my phone multiple times, and because I wasn't answering, because I was having fun with my boyfriend, she left voice messages on my phone calling me a liar for withholding the truth. That same weekend I was away, she went into my room where she found my vibrator and slut-shamed me for that too. I was 19 and completely derailed by her abuse. She froze me out for weeks. As a small child, these freeze-outs might last a day or two or into adulthood, and sometimes they could last weeks or months. No amount of explaining or pleading changed her mind. I remember after one episode of my mother's explosions and accusations that I was the bad girl, I begged and begged her not to go. I was crying so hard and I was so confused by her irrational abuse. And she just laughed in my face and left. It was a sucker punch, and I started to understand from that moment that my mum was not a safe person. There have been countless times where she has reduced me to what feels like a single nerve ending, and I am so tired and numb for days and days. To date, my mum has hacked my Facebook twice to read my messages. She saw intimate messages and photos, private information and conversations, and she's weaponized these things against me, accused me of being the bad person, and also that the information she found, she's then used as a wedge in certain friendships of mine to break me up with friends. Conflicts with her are never ever resolved. They are always brought up, and the next time we have this fight, they're then thrown at me, and then there is never ever any accountability from her. It is always someone else's fault, and when I have withdrawn, then I am accused of cutting her out. I have gone low contact with Mum, and in the past we just seem to dip back into these same patterns of her exploding and then me feeling responsible and feeling guilty and then chasing her. But recently, like literally this week, after a particularly bad episode with her, I had just had enough. I had gone no contact with my mum, and I feel good about it. Over the years, I've been in and out of therapy. I'm currently seeing a great psychologist, and I married a man who is the kind of human every trauma victim should have in their life. He is unwavering in his stability and support and love, and I can be a wreck, and he is unwavering. And unlike my mother, his love is unconditional, And his own mum is also a source of maternal love and compassion for me. And of course, my mother is threatened by my mother-in-law. I have solid female friendships, but I'm not entirely out of the woods. When my husband and I first fell pregnant, I was terrified I would have a daughter. I was so afraid of repeating the same toxic cycles. But when our first daughter was born, I made this promise with myself that these cycles would stop with me. I would not have this bullshit in my life, and I certainly would not have my children see this same shit play out. I now have 3 daughters. I think the universe is really sending me a message. There have been times in my mothering journey where I am not proud of the choices I have made in a moment of overwhelm. I will snap or explode. It's like my trauma brain goes, "This is too much, I'm out." I find it hard, although it is getting easier to hug my kids and co-regulate them when they cry. And it hurts my heart to say this, but their emotions trigger the shit out of me. One night recently, my middle daughter, who is a spitting image of me as a little girl, was really upset and needed my hugs. It took all of my strength to pick her up and cuddle her. I don't know if that's normal, but what got me through this immense discomfort was just imagining that my daughter was it was me at that age, and I just imagined hugging little. I felt a release. I felt sad, but I also was able to come back online and see my daughter and hug her too. Is that fucked up? So my question is this: what do the daughters of narcissistic mothers do when they themselves become mothers of daughters? Wow, that's a mouthful. I am utterly terrified that I will end up like my mum, and I don't want to leave a legacy of intergenerational trauma. But how do I do that, Heather? Thank you.
Tara, thank you so much for that. It is really hard to be a mom and admit that you find it challenging to be present and nurturing for your daughter. And you are right to believe and know that this feeling is all tied up in your childhood. You're also right to believe that you can undo the intergenerational trauma by doing your own childhood trauma recovery work. The intergenerational trauma in your family is already ending with you, simply because you're identifying it, saying it out loud, and actively working to lead your family differently, despite what your trauma brain is telling you to do. Before I go any further here, Tara, I just want to acknowledge you and your story for a minute. You went through a hell of a lot. And of course, there are so many things about the human experience that will feel hard for you to navigate. Feelings, connections, and relationships are understandably a real struggle after being on the receiving end of so much confusion, cruelty, and abuse. I am so sorry to know that all of this happened to you, and I sure am glad you have a therapist you trust and a husband you can lean on to get you through. Neither of those things, the therapist or the healthy marital relationship, just happen by accident. Those aren't things you stumble into. They happen because of you, because of your ability to show up for yourself and for the life you want to have. It's because of this right here, Tara, that I hold so much hope for you, for your ability to mother, and that you can build a strong, healthy relationship with your girls. I really do hold so much hope for you. This is going to be okay. So, first ladies, I want to break down all of this for you so you can understand what it is we're all talking about. I want to get us all on the same page. First, out of the gate, let me just say that whether we use the term intergenerational trauma or generational trauma, we're talking about the same thing. Those phrases are used quite interchangeably. I tend to prefer calling it generational trauma, so for the sake of this conversation, that's what I'll be calling it going forward. So this is what we mean when we use the phrase generational trauma. We're talking about the negative behaviors, toxic patterns, and emotional scars you experience from your own mothers getting unintentionally passed on to your children. Just as you struggle with self esteem, boundaries, and emotional regulation, your kids might end up struggling with those things too. That's the simple kind of diagnostic breakdown of it. My mother's mother treated her in a particular way. As a result, she treated me in a particular way. As a result of how I was raised and how it made me feel, I am now looking to raise my kids in a different way. I am breaking the generational trauma curse. While I'm being clear and direct in my explanation of this, it for sure doesn't mean that what I'm talking to you about is easy. If it were easy, I would be able to just say to you, you know how your mom made you feel judged, minimized, stupid? Don't do that with your own kids, and we're done the conversation. This episode wouldn't need to happen in two parts, but there is nuance to this. So much nuance, and we have to hold so much grace in this conversation. Please, all of you listening, women who are mothers, women who are afraid to be mothers, women who want to be mothers, hold yourself with so much grace. So much. So, here's what I want and need you to know as we dig into this. First, we need to help you understand something us psychobabble people refer to as the cycle of behavior. The cycle of behavior for you daughters as you become mothers yourselves refers to the behavior, the attitudes, and the emotional responses that get passed down to you from your own experiences with your moms. You heard her on repeat for your entire lives, so her nonsense got programmed into you and it impacted your own parenting style. Right here is where we often encounter the pendulum. Some of you, because you were raised with a strict set of beliefs by your moms, will think your job as a mother is to impart those beliefs onto your children. Because you were conditioned to believe that's what others do, that's what you'll do. Others of you listening will swing that pendulum in the exact opposite direction, and you will work deliberately to be the exact opposite of your mom's. Whatever she didn't do to meet your needs, you're going to be sure to do. However she talked to you, you're going to move heaven and earth to make sure your kids never hear you talking to them that way. You will make it your life's mission to be everything she wasn't. That sometimes, though, ends up being to your detriment and to your child's detriment because you run the risk of becoming excessively lenient or permissive. And we know that kids need limits to feel safe and they need to be successful with limits so they can move successfully through the world. And as with so many other things, we need to control that pendulum and we need to help you find balance. And to find that balance, you'll need to focus on regulating your own emotions and paying attention to your own emotional experience with self awareness. Tara, I heard you in your story. You are worried for yourself and for your daughters because you find it hard to hug them and nurture them. I am less worried for you and for your daughters because you are aware that you find it hard to hug and nurture them. Your awareness of this is what gives me so much hope for you and your family. Once you all become aware of your emotional experiences and whatever situations in front of you, you gain so much more control over what you think you can do about it. You can stop and think. But this is where it gets super tricky and slippery. Here I am telling you that you need to be more self aware and that you would benefit from focusing on yourself. And for many of you, all you're going to hear when you hear me say that is be more like your mother. Think about yourself. Consider yourself. And you are working so hard to be anything but her. And I get that. But pay attention to what I actually just said. I didn't say make your relationship with your kids about you. I didn't say use your kids as pawns to do your bidding. I didn't say use your kids to feel better about yourselves. That's what your mothers did and how they approached mothering. But those things are not self awareness, they are self entitlement. And there is a big, fat difference to those things. Here, I'm encouraging you to pay attention to what you're thinking and feeling so you can bring those things to the conscious surface and so you can have more control over what you're going to do about it. Not so you can go off and be selfish and as abusive as your moms. This is where I remind all of you of this is not that. You are going to need it a lot as you focus on mothering your kids and breaking those patterns. This is not that. Paying attention to your feelings when your kids are making you feel a certain way might feel wrong or selfish. Tara, we're hearing from you that you feel like something's broken in you for having this experience and these struggles, but this is normal. That after a lifetime of being exposed to and on the receiving end of dysregulating emotions, that you will find your emotions, your kids, or your own experiences to be intimidating and overwhelming. This struggle makes a lot of sense to me. Let me walk you through what likely happened for all of you at some point. There likely was a moment in time in your own childhoods where your mother looked at you, saw your life, saw something you were experiencing, and she felt an energy in her. You and I might name that energy jealousy, but it is unlikely that a narcissistic or emotionally limited person would have the emotional intelligence to be able to say to themselves, I'm seeing my daughter get something I haven't had, and it's making me feel some kind of way. Instead, they felt that energy and made an impulsive decision to remove it. They maybe took something away from you. Maybe they ignored you, but they disrupted that moment because they couldn't sit in the energy they were feeling. If they had had better skills of self awareness, they could have chosen differently and they could have taken care of you better without neglecting you or abusing you. This right here is why I am encouraging self awareness for you to learn about your feelings, what you react to, and why, so you can get in control of your responses. Because jealousy, my friends, is so common when survivors of childhood trauma start to see how better taken care of their kids are than they were. It is painful, and there is so much grief when you see your own child at the age you were when your mother made such awful and harmful choices. There is so much pain here. Memories in your mind, but also your bodies remember. So some things are just felt without any words attached. All of this is so much, Tara, and all of you mothers listening. So much. This is some hard fucking shit, and there is no sugarcoating it. This is the work, and you're doing it so this shit stops with you. You get to know your feelings and reactions and explore them so you can decide what happens next. So you can remind yourselves this is not that. What is happening with my child is not what happened to me. In these moments, my mom chose to hurt me. I can choose to love my child and be loving toward them. We want you to learn about your emotions and reactions. Some of what comes up for you will be grief for yourselves in your own childhoods. Some of it will be your trauma brains. You will find yourself reacting to something in the same way as it might have gone down when you were a kid, and you will need to access Wise Mind so you can remind yourselves that this is not that. Also, though, mothering, when you've been the daughter of a narcissistic or emotionally limited mother, emotions in general were not safe for you. Your emotions were often used to manipulate you. Your mother's emotions were also used against you. You were programmed to react to her anger, her disappointment, her tears, her whatever. And all of this was often put out there in such extremes. And let's be honest, your mothers at so many moments in your lives probably looked like toddlers. So, of course, when your toddler acts like a toddler, of course you are going to have a reaction to that. Of course you do. It's really hard for so many of you to process and understand what feels like extreme displays of emotion because such displays of emotion by you were never allowed, and displays by your mother often led to crisis. So when you see your kid emotional, of course, ladies, you might freeze. Of course you might. It makes so much sense to me. You all make so much sense to me. Also, though, some of you, because you were learning how to survive by the skin of your teeth, never learned how to connect in a healthy way to other people's emotions. So you see your kid melting down and you don't know what to do because you have never been taught and you don't have a lot of experience with it. And that makes so much sense to me, too. Of course, you don't know how to do it. No one's ever taught you, and no one's ever explained. When we talk about generational trauma and ending it, this is why it's so hard, because there are so many parts to this pain. And here's what we know about survivors of childhood trauma: you struggle with self esteem, confident decision making, knowing yourself, and emotion regulation, just to name a few, right? You know what tests each of those things, what jumps on each of those things as if it's on a pogo stick? Motherhood. Motherhood is scary, regardless of childhood trauma. It's intimidating, it's nerve wracking, and it is exhausting. The messaging out there alone is that you are supposed to know what to do, that all of it is supposed to be awesome, that it's a gift, and you are supposed to love every part of it. When that isn't your experience, when you feel different in your experience and you feel like another, your instinct might be to freeze, shut down, or numb out. Many of you will overcompensate by doing things. You'll check off every item on your perceived mothering to-do list. You will try to do every tactile thing connected to mothering because being present, being in it, and being still with your kid will be a challenge. You won't know how to do it, and that's okay. You're not supposed to know how to do it. No one has taught you, but you can get support from safe people in your lives. You can ask mentors for guidance. You can have people normalize and check your work on things. It's okay to ask for and to accept help. It's okay to lean into the idea that no one really knows what they're doing and most people are just trying to do their best. And Tara, I really, really love what you've started to do here with your own kiddos, seeing their emotional moments as moments to reparent little girl Tara, to give her what she's always wanted and needed. Your daughter never even needs to know that you're doing that. It's something you can do for yourself to get through the moment. Part of trauma recovery and ending generational trauma has to be reparenting your inner child and working through that. And just like self awareness, the idea of doing that is going to trigger the heck out of all of you. You are going to see yourselves reparenting yourselves and worry and fear that you are starting to make your kids' experience all about you. But remember, that is not what this is. It might feel like it, but this is where you need your wise mind. This is where you look at your behavior, look at what you're doing, and see that you are being present for your kid, taking care of your kid, and being there. This is not that. So, how do you get used to managing your kids' emotions when it's so uncomfortable? You're going to do what I've been walking you through. Acknowledge and validate your own feelings. You are going to work on accepting your feelings, that you have them, and that they need and deserve your attention. This, I know, is uncomfortable. Of course it is. But it is also a normal part of the healing process. Then I would encourage you to work on emotion regulation exercises such as mindfulness. There are so many mindfulness exercises that you can Google, so I'm not going to list them all out here. This is already going to be a beast of an episode. But when you're calm, you can make mindfulness and deep breathing a part of your regular everyday so that when your kids are wild with their emotion, you can have some sort of practice behind you at calming yourself down. Also, don't pretend you don't know anything. Trauma brain might have you freeze and clench up, but there are ways you will know how to model healthy behavior when your kids are feeling a whole heck of a lot. Don't tell yourself some story that all you know is trauma or unhealthy coping styles. That is simply not true. So don't cut yourselves short. When you see your kids displaying a lot of emotion, normalize it for them. You can do this by inviting conversation and being curious. You can tell your kids what you're observing, and you can ask them if you're right. I love Dr. Becky for this too. Go ahead and do yourselves a favor and Google Dr. Becky, and you'll find her books. And I think she has a podcast, and she also covers a lot of really good things on her social media accounts. She has so much to teach parents about this, and she is really good at what she does. She is a really good reference for all of you, and I think her work could also help you guys a whole heck of a lot. When you see feelings your kids are having and label for them, you can check in with them and ask them if you have their feelings right. In doing this, you create a safe environment where kids learn that it's okay to express their emotions and they don't have to have fear about their feelings or your reaction to them. It'll be so important that you're patient with yourselves, that you show yourselves so much grace and compassion. Of course, you're going to mess up. Of course, you're going to make mistakes. But the beauty of parenting in a really healthy way is you get to model that for your kids. You get to teach them that adults say sorry, that healthy and safe adults acknowledge their shortcomings and that they apologize. And this is a really powerful thing to do for a kid. It is such a powerful thing to do for adults. As a therapist, I have really fucked it up a time or two with a client. I messed it up a lot when I was working with kids, and I have hurt people in my own relationships. And the act of apology is so profound. Often for your daughters, you have a skewed sense of apologies. You either never got them or you heard these dramatic, manipulative statements like, I'm sorry, I was such an awful mother and that you hate me so much. So it's hard for you to think of an apology as anything but manipulative. But a well-intentioned and clear apology with recognition of how your kid might have been affected is so powerful. Life-changing, powerful. Teaches your kids what they deserve. Obviously, us adults have some experience with apologies not being accepted or being used against us. But this isn't usually true with kids. Kids usually can have that conversation when apologies are well-intentioned, and they can be profound. They can be more powerful than a parenting moment when the parent gets everything right. Obviously, you can't apologize for every little thing, and sometimes your kid is going to be good and pissed at you. And that brings me to the next two important parts of this conversation: controlling that pendulum and having limits with your kid. Right about now is where I need to start that conversation with you about the importance of having boundaries and limits for your kids. However, Tara, your question touches on and brushes up against another really important part of this conversation. When you reparented yourself, while you parented your daughter, you weren't just tending to her emotions. This moment touches on attachment struggles that daughters of narcissistic and emotionally limited mothers can sometimes have. It also connects and tracks with how hard offering physical attention, affection, and nurturing can sometimes be. All of this can make you question and doubt your ability to give and receive love. This is a hell of a lot. So you should all be sitting down and having some tea or coffee with me for this conversation. You're going to need it. I bring this up, though, because it's so important. We can't have a parenting conversation without talking about this part. Now, some of you listening have nothing but love to give to your kids. You can snuggle up on them with the best of them. You can find healing in your ability to give your kids what you never had. Those are your reparenting moments, and they help you feel better. For some of you moms, though, this is where your heart breaks open, though, where you experience dysregulation, fear, and hopelessness or helplessness. You feel like you yourselves lack the supposed mothering gene and that your kids will always be punished for being born to you. I want us to unpack this together because there is work for healing in this conversation, and I think I can help. Here goes. Let's tackle attachment first. You might have heard me talk about different attachment styles on previous episodes. I go in depth into them on the 4th episode, so I'm not going too deep here. Basically, we have healthy attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and good old disorganized attachment. Daughters of narcissistic moms are vulnerable to struggling with attachment in general, and it's about how you connect to others. Those with anxious attachment are going to be sensitive to changes in the relationship. They're going to be reactive to perceived distance. They're going to want to be close to their people. Some daughters have a more avoidant nature when it comes to attachment. They will feel uncomfortable getting close, will need to experience a lot of distance in the relationship, and will be challenged by intimacy. More often than not, though, my observational experience is that with many daughters of emotionally limited mothers struggling, what most of them are struggling with is disorganized attachment, which means sometimes you can be anxious in your tendencies and other times you can find yourselves to be avoidant. Relationships can be quite dysregulating for many daughters, and while romantic relationships do get a lot of the airtime on this, you daughters who are also mothers know that your attachment struggles can impact your ability to form secure bonds with your kids. So, let's just pause a minute right there and take a breath. This is really painful stuff we're talking about. When you hear me say those words, that your attachment struggles can impact your ability to form secure bonds with your kids. You might start filling yourselves with blame and shame, but it is really important to me that you understand this. I am not in any way, shape, or form saying you don't love your kids. I am saying that showing your love and receiving their love challenges you. And this is often because you are so fearful of being your mother that you are consciously or subconsciously afraid to get close. I think of it a little bit as trauma brain and a little bit of mama bear. Trauma brain protects us, so your trauma brain is protecting you, but your mama bear instinct thinks it's protecting your kid from you in some way, and that's a little bit why you end up keeping your distance. Conversations like the one I'm having with you today are no walk in the park, but this is the work. This is the trauma recovery work you are doing to help yourself be better moms for your kids. And let's face it, You are all behind the 8 ball in that. You have your own trauma stories and no real healthy example. It can feel like you're flying blind, but the more we get you understanding yourselves and knowing yourselves, the more we are getting you into wise mind. And the more you are in wise mind, the more present you're going to be able to be for your kids. I want to talk to you directly and honestly about struggles some daughters of emotionally limited moms can have with showing their kids physical affection. While some mothers will hug and touch and physically nurture their kids easily and effortlessly, it doesn't come so easy for other moms. And as you've told us, Tara, that comes with a great deal of shame. However, it's my bias that you have a story of what nurturance looks like and the way it has to be. And I just want to remind you that there are so many mothers wandering this earth, mothering really, really well. They don't have trauma backgrounds and they still aren't really fans of excessive physical nurturance of their kids. There is no such thing as a mother gene that turns you all into really physically affectionate people. Some women react to motherhood with this and some don't, and that's okay because kids just need you to be there, to be present. They need a witness. They need validation. They need their truth to be heard and they need their pain witnessed. What that looks like in response can be different. Being physically present might mean an arm around your kid, holding their hand, sitting next to them, having the sides of your bodies touch. It might mean sitting next to them in bed and tucking them in. It might mean eye contact and smiling, high fives, or holding their hand. And like Tara shares, it might mean faking it till you make it. And let me tell you, Tara, and everyone listening, faking it still counts until we're talking about, well, but that's a whole other show for a whole other time. Doing what you don't want to do or aren't comfortable doing because it's what your kids need, well, if that isn't mothering, I don't know what is. If those of you who struggle with this like Tara does, and we know Tara isn't the only one, if you could just give yourselves permission to let physical nurturance and affection look different than you think it's supposed to, I think you would find yourselves to be far more capable and far more loving than you believe yourselves to be. Also, affection can be learned. It may not always be your favorite thing. Physical touch may never be one of your love languages, but you can learn how your kids like to receive love and work on those things. I have worked with women on this over the years, and I also have to say that it is my observational experience that all of this gets easier for you moms simply by doing your own work. Once you see, understand, and really come to a place of believing that your own discomfort is not rooted in your ability, but in your own unmet childhood needs and past experiences, you can work through those experiences. You can release those feelings and you can start to build a new relationship with what physical affection and attention looks like in your life. That is what happens when you start to heal. It is possible to learn ways of giving and receiving affection that feel safe and genuine. And I promise you, even the healthiest, most mentally strong mothers get touched out and need a break. You will be more sensitive to your limits around this, but it is normal to feel and have limits around it. Now, my friends, we need to do some good old fashioned myth busting on your perceived ability to give and receive love given your histories with your moms. We know that you daughters are already plagued with self doubt, so of course you might struggle with feelings of unworthiness and self doubt, leading to difficulties in both giving and receiving love. You might question whether you're capable of loving your children properly, and you might doubt your ability to be deserving of their love in return. That is, of course, because your own mothers didn't know how to love you, so you didn't have anyone to teach you. Love was weaponized, and it always came with conditions. So many parts of narcissistic abuse recovery is about building better relationships with yourselves. And one of the reasons this is so critical is that learning to trust yourself also means learning to trust your own ability to love. And yes, to be clear, in saying this, I absolutely, fucking positively am directly challenging the notion that you are unlovable or inadequate. I am also assuring you that if this is all a real struggle for you and you are in the weeds of it, trauma recovery work helps. You can learn to work through your attachment issues. It's possible to develop healthier patterns, and you can build trust in your capacity to love and to nurture. You can learn too how to model healthy attachment for your kids. And it might feel like the blind leading the blind, but it's possible, and you can learn together. You can practice with small, consistent efforts to provide physical affection, express love verbally, and create a safe emotional environment. It's so important that you are patient and that you show yourselves so much grace. You have to be gentle with yourselves. Otherwise, trauma brain just swoops right in and it senses your ambiguity, your nervousness, and it takes it on as a threat. Self compassion will reduce some of that pressure out of the pressure valve. This is pattern breaking and generational curse breaking stuff we're talking about here. It's powerful. It's possible to establish routines with your kids that include regular physical affection, open conversations about emotions, and it is absolutely possible to create a home environment where love is freely given and received, even when your own childhood dragged you through a whole hell of a lot. Know that kids also need limits and boundaries in order to feel safe. If they don't know who's in charge and that the adult has them, they don't feel safe stretching themselves, learning, or making mistakes. They learn themselves by stretching, but they need to be held with limits, structure, and accountability. And daughters of emotionally limited moms are really vulnerable to the pendulum swinging and becoming too permissive as a response to the fear of becoming like your moms. You'll want to learn about what healthy boundaries between parents and kids look like at different age groups. You'll have to rewire your brains a bit so you can really absorb and take in the idea that boundaries are not about control like you experienced as a kid, but they are about creating safe and predictable environments for your children. There are so many styles and ways of doing this that are impacted by your values and what you have buy-in into. So I encourage you to look around and see what feels true for you so that when you are in wise mind, not when you are feeling fearful or reactive, you will feel confident in knowing what to do and in making the right decision for you, your kids, and your family. Then, just like with physical affection, you can practice with small, consistent boundaries. You can introduce rules and expectations gently and firmly. Those two things can exist together. You might do this with establishing morning or evening routines, or in how you navigate the use of screens in your house, or rules around homework. Consistency is key. Kids do well with consistency, with knowing what to expect. So, sticking with your boundaries helps you build trust and security with them. With consistency with yourselves and your kids, you'll be able to see and communicate that saying no and having limits doesn't mean that you're being unkind or unloving. You're showing that you care about your kid and their well being. Now, working with kids in residential for 10 years, I can tell you that I believe this with absolutely every fiber of my being. And I can tell you that I used to go into parents' homes and teach parents these things. I know this works, but it only works when you choose to believe that it's possible for you too. Oh, holy heck. Are you guys still with me? This has been a beast of an episode. And Tara, I dove deep into a lot of it with you here. I really, really hope you found it helpful. If today's conversation resonated with you and you are looking for a space to share and find support on your mothering journey while recovering from your own childhood narcissistic abuse, please consider joining our Tuesday group. Consider this your standing invitation. It's a virtual peer support group for daughters of narcissistic or emotionally limited moms. We're diving into challenges just like we talked about today and other challenges you might be facing, and we work together to find healing. I'd love it if you'd consider joining us. You can find a link with more information in the show notes. Next week, we're getting pragmatic. A daughter of a narcissistic mother was raised to believe that grades and success were everything. She's now in a battle with her son because he isn't performing academically. She's finding herself dysregulated, at odds with herself and with him. I'm going to be using everything we talked about today to apply it to her situation to help her forgive herself and better connect with her son. This was a big topic and it was so important. Tara, thank you for your bravery and sharing your story. You, my friend, are a member of a community of women around the world who are in this with you. And I most definitely am in it with you too. Until next week, bye for now. I do hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you have a question you'd like me to consider for the show, please do email me over at heather@daughtersnpd.com. You are always welcome to share your story or questions by recording yourself using the voice app on your phone. For best recording quality, please do record directly into your phone without using headphones or Bluetooth speakers. We're building an incredible community as well over on Instagram, and I'd love to see you over there too. You can find us at Daughters NPD. Lastly, if you love what you've been hearing here on Mayhem and have found the show helpful in your own trauma recovery, please do consider becoming a Mother Mayhem sponsor by purchasing simple scripts for saying hard things. It's a resource I created that provides the right words for the hard conversations, and it covers life, love, and work. You'll find a link for that in the show notes. If you know another woman who needs this conversation in her life, please do share the show with her. Your reviews and social shares help spread the word, and I hope you'll consider doing so. Special thanks to Heather Clark for editing the show. She's in my head and knows what I meant to say when the words come out backwards. Thanks so much for your time today. As always, I'm in it with you. Bye for now.